We come now to item number 11, which is consultation on the draft National Adaptation Plan. That was sent out to all members of the governing body, I think last Friday, and it's still open for any comments back from councillors until tomorrow. But we'd be keen if you had any thoughts on the draft plan to feed that in. But the purpose of today's recommendations is to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Environment and Climate Change Committee, myself and an IMSB member, to approve the submission that will be sent off, finalised and sent off probably sometime early next week. Can I ask Councillor Richard Hills to move and Councillor Pipacoombe to second the recommendations, and ask Matthew Blakey and maybe Megan Tyler, if she wants to make comments as well, to introduce the item. Matthew, welcome, and if you'd like to take us through the item, please.
Thank you, Mayor Goff, and tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm here today to present the item on our submission on the draft National Adaptation Plan and Managed Retreat, and in particular to seek delegated authority for sign-off. There was a governing body workshop held on the 18th of May where a more detailed presentation was provided on the draft National Adaptation Plan and Managed Retreat, and key themes for feedback were provided at that workshop. So I won't be going through a detailed analysis of the plan or the submission today, but would like to present an overview to you. I'd just like to confirm whether the slides will be shared or whether I should share those slides now.
If you can share them, please, Matthew, yourself.
Excellent. Thank you. If I could just request permission to share the slides, that would be great.
Yep, we're just in the process of doing that. Sorry, having invited you to share, we haven't yet given you permission to do so, but that's happening just as we speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I apologise.
How are you going there? Oh, yep, it's up on my screen now. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Apologies for the delay. So, as mentioned, here today to present, and in particular to seek delegated authority to approve the final submission. The Environment and Climate Change Committee would normally consider a submission on the draft National Adaptation Plan as it sits within the committee's terms of reference. However, due to the timeframes we're working to, this has not been possible. So I wanted to provide you with a very brief overview in terms of the draft National Adaptation Plan. You will have received this or similar presentation at the workshop, but just in way of a reminder, the draft National Adaptation Plan is the first government adaptation plan for Aotearoa New Zealand. So in that way it is significant. It sets central government's direction for the first time relating to climate change adaptation. In that way, it's different to the direction we've received around emissions reduction, which is more established. This is very much the first time we are seeing this direction coming through. It is a requirement under the Climate Change Response Act, so central government are required to develop a national adaptation plan. It builds on a body of work that has been completed over the last few years, including the National Climate Change Risk Assessment and the Climate Change Adaptation Technical Working Group report, and it follows on from that to set direction. It's worth noting that the National Adaptation Plan is aimed at a specific level in terms of the context and the level in which it operates. So the emphasis is on shaping regulatory frameworks and institutions to align with the changing climate context. It aligns statutory and policy directions to account for changing risks, and it establishes coordination across government and with sectors. And lastly, it brings together scattered climate information and supporting access to climate data sets and information. So that's really about gathering what we know and bringing it together into one place. So really just to highlight there that is the level of decision making and direction that the National Adaptation Plan is focused on. It is not focused on local specific issues, but rather setting the direction at a central government level and a regulatory and policy level. In addition to the draft National Adaptation Plan, there is also consultation on early thinking relating to managed retreat and flood insurance consultation. So this is very much aligned with the draft National Adaptation Plan, but it's early thinking on this. Managed retreat will be covered through the Climate Adaptation Act in due course. So managed retreat relates to critical actions within the National Adaptation Plan, such as the reform of the resource management system. It focuses on passing legislation to support managed retreat and develop options for home flood insurance issues. So the focus here in terms of the early thinking for managed retreat is around the objectives to guide the development of managed retreat legislation. And you can see those identified. So for setting clear roles, responsibilities and processes for managed retreat from areas of intolerable risk, to provide stronger tools for councils to modify or extinguish existing uses of land, to provide clarity on tools and processes for acquiring land and related compensation, to clarify local government liability for decision making on managed retreat and the role of the courts, and to provide clear criteria for when central government will intervene or not in a managed retreat process. So these are the objectives that have been identified within the managed retreat documentation as part of the consultation. It's, as I say, early thinking on that framework. In terms of the key feedback themes for our submission, these are outlined in the committee report, but just to touch on these, the key feedback themes include a focus on the interconnected system-wide approach that is outlined in the draft National Adaptation Plan. We support this approach, but we also note that legislative reforms to correct misalignment and clarify roles of local government in relation to third-party actors are required. We will be having a strong focus on the role of local government, and in particular a focus on Auckland Council in our submission, making it clear that the roles and responsibilities will need to be clearly defined through the resource management reforms and reflect local government resource capacity. Funding and insurance is a key theme, and we note that clarity is needed on funding mechanisms and alternative frameworks that will enable local government, private sector and communities to access funding. Managing risk and vulnerability is a clear focus, and we're outlining the need for clear direction with regard to who decides what level of risk is tolerable and who bears the liability for impacted properties. In terms of resilient infrastructure and systems, we are asking that clarity is needed around approaches and parameters for infrastructure design in the context of an uncertain climate future. And lastly, around managed retreat, we need to outline that resource management reforms will need to be carefully considered in terms of how managed retreat will be applied in practice. This includes roles and responsibilities and considering managed retreat alongside other options. So they are the key feedback themes that we have identified. There are a number clearly of other messages, and one of the key feedback points we've received on our draft submission is that we need to make our feedback points pop out of the submission. We need to make sure they are clear asks, clear recommendations to central government. So we will be working on that. There is also more specific information that we've worked with staff to identify in terms of the particular elements and the particular technical specifications or asks that might be required to support the draft National Adaptation Plan. It's also important for me to note that the consultation documents include a Māori worldview framework known as Ro Ora. This is complemented by a series of actions that specifically target Māori and others that will be significant to Māori. And this will certainly be an element of our submission as well in terms of how the National Adaptation Plan incorporates Te Ao Māori and how it enables Auckland Council to meet its obligations to Māori, recognising that Māori are often in a position where they will be impacted by climate change due to location and circumstances. I wanted to outline the submission timeline to you to ensure that that is clear. So the consultation was opened on the 27th of April. The memorandum was shared with the Mayor, Councillors, IMSB members, local board members, the Tamaki Makaurau Mana Whenua Forum and iwi leaders on the 10th of May. The governing body workshop was held on the 18th of May, with the draft submission circulated on the 20th of May last Friday. Today, on the 26th of May, is the governing body meeting to seek delegated authority to approve the final submission. We will be accepting feedback from the Mayor, Councillors and IMSB members until the end of the day tomorrow, and would welcome your feedback. We will then be finalising the submission for Tuesday, where it will be sent for sign-off by designated members, those who have delegated authority, with the submission due date being the end of next week, next Friday, the 3rd of June, which is when the consultation closes. That brings me to the end of my slides. Very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Matthew. If I can be slightly pedantic and point out that under point 4 of the key feedback themes, bears as spelt there means exposes rather than carries. So if you could change the spelling, it might be appropriate. I'd hate
Certainly.
the central government officials to pull us up on a point like that. I've just got one question, and you've received my feedback already. I am very keen that we don't ask for greater clarity about liability, but we express the point that we, as the collector of only 7% of public revenues in the local government sector, don't have a disproportionate liability on us. And I recall Jack Hodder telling the local government New Zealand rural and provincial sector meeting, actually, probably one that Deputy Mayor Cashmore was at, that the local government liability is litigation risk is mainly on decisions to limit development at the moment, but in the future it will be on the consequences of allowing development and failing to implement adaptation measures. So I think we do have, just to misuse the word, real exposure there, and we really need to make it clear that funding liability, which the government in its consultation document says shouldn't fall on central government predominantly, nor should it fall disproportionately on local government. I think that's more a comment actually rather than a question, but I don't have any questions at this stage. The paper is quite straightforward in terms of proposing the delegation, but just to emphasise to governing body members in the room and online, please have a quick look at that paper, and if there are any things that you want to influence the submission on, get your replies in by tomorrow. So that's really important. I think we haven't had a lot of feedback yet. Question from Councillor Richard Hills. Comment, is it? I'll just check if there's any questions first, Richard. No questions, so let's move to comments. Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, thank you, Mayor. And yeah, just a brief comment from me. Thank you to Matthew and the Tonkin and Taylor team and others for putting this together. It is in line with our Te Tarakia Tāwhiri, but it's a bit strengthened in the areas that the Mayor speaks about. It's very clear that we cannot end up in another leaky home building situation where we are sort of the ones left with the bill when our balance sheet just does not and will not into the future be able to deal with this massive issue from a local government point of view. Yes, we have responsibility in this area, but financially we need that clear guidance from government on what we can do here, and also the abilities through the RMA changes around what we can prevent. At the moment, there is not a lot we can do to prevent significant change in our coastal environments, even in intensification potentially under the government's changes to the NPSUD, through the NPSUD. So that is a real concern, that we will look like idiots if we continue to allow certain things being built in the coast when we know that, or we have good evidence that those structures or buildings will not be, not make it through the next decade, let alone 50 years from now. This largely, this obviously document is the report is about delegating this, but I just want to say that it is we should be congratulating the government for getting to this point and putting this forward for significant change. We have not had a plan like this before. No one's really wanted to touch it, but the issue is we've had 50 years of warning so far on climate change, and globally and nationally we have not done enough, and we're still not doing enough. And the sad fact is that climate change is here. We see every month or so having 1 in 500 year floods. We have significant damage to our coastline, just our public assets alone when we have storms, and they're going to get stronger, and it's going to get more and more difficult to address. So this will give us far more direction on private land as well as the public land that we are doing through our shoreline adaptation plan. So it doesn't mean we need to stop the mitigation measures we're trying to put in and climate action, but it does unfortunately point to the fact that for decades we've left the next generation worse off, and we need to deal with that situation. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I have no other comments. Sorry, Councillor Linda Cooper.
I'm hoping in the submission that we do point out to the government that some of their recent legislation is somewhat contradictory in terms of housing enabling bill, where it's an anywhere and everywhere type of approach. And we do have the qualifying matters of not building in flood zones, etc. But the fact that you have to make it a qualifying matter, that it's just not something that we just don't do, because we know that the costs going ahead for homeowners and hopefully not councils, because I absolutely support what you said, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Hills. We can't have another leaky building debacle and be the last person standing. So I just hope that we also ask them to make sure that they're not going to have contradictory pieces of legislation that put us in an untenable position where we're forced to do something by one piece of legislation but forced to do something completely contrary with another piece of legislation, that they actually enable us to address adaptation rather than make it more difficult. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that point was pretty well expressed by a number of us who were at the workshop. So, Matthew, if we can build that in, that'd be great. Okay, there's no further comments, so I'll put the recommendations to councillors. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare it carried. And I'm now learning to wait long enough to hear all of the vote before I put the recommendation. Matthew, thank you very much for the work that you've put into that. Like so much of the work you have to do, it's been under a lot of pressure, so we appreciate the hours that you and the team have put into it. Right.